maybe she's 14. Yeah, matcha from Starbucks. And so she kept talking about it. And I said, would you like me to make you one? And so I made one for her. And then she said, oh, it's as good as Starbucks. And that's high praise. Anyway, so now they bought her everything.
So now we're starting.
Okay.
So hi, we're going to talk about matcha tonight and all kinds of things. Welcome to the Aperture PhotoBook Club. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with An-My Lê and Stephen Shore. This is a photo book club I think I may have been dreaming of before we called it the Aperture PhotoBook Club, before it existed. We are here because Aperture is a wonderful 73-year-old nonprofit that I joined about 4 years ago. And pretty soon thereafter, we started the Aperture PhotoBook Club, which was building on the quarterly magazine, of course, is what we were founded to do. But pretty soon thereafter, we started making books. And the idea for this club was, could we invite people into the conversation about what it means to make a photo book? What are all of the little decisions that go into it that help you understand how it is its own work of art? And I think there's almost no one better to talk about this than the two of you. The fact that you work together, Stephen is the program director at Bard and a professor there, and An-My is also a professor there. I learned two things tonight. One is that they don't see one another on campus that much. And two is they've never done a talk together. So I'm really thrilled you both are here. For the people who are here tuning in, sometimes we can see where people are tuning in from. Maybe not right now for me. But if you are, put it in the chat. It is absolutely amazing to see across the country and around the world who tunes in live. And then we also get a lot of people tuning in later. So welcome wherever you're coming from. Let's think, what else have I forgot? Oh, the one other thing I forgot is that the reason everybody looks as good as we look and is because of, thank you, Clark and Candle Productions, and thank you to my colleagues, Alex and Brianna, and also thank you to FotoFocus. FotoFocus is a wonderful Cincinnati-based photo nonprofit, and they help us put this on. So thank you, FotoFocus. And overall, we have found that the nicest way to share the book, if you're holding it on your lap at home, great. Tell us what page you want to talk about, and we can do that. But Brianna has been making these little flip-throughs that kind of set us all on a level stage so that everybody can know what it is we're looking at and talking about, whether or not you have one. And usually this involves someone talking over the flip-through, saying, oh, here's what you're looking at, or here's but you had a different idea for what this flip-through was going to be, and maybe do we want to give it away, or do we want to just dive right into it?
I think we should dive right in.
Okay, fine. We're just going to dive right into it, and then we'll explain the unique magic of this particular flip-through. So, Clark, take it away.
My city in the light of day, thick smoke, helicopter blades, heaven and earth, I've never moved so fast. You never know the fear your mama has. I know your father can't call anymore. He never meant to be a man of war. But we found freedom, what will you do now? Bury the burden, baby, make this one I want you to see. Fashion was high, my hair was so long. This was maybe 73. You know I have been adored by good and kind men. They sent their love with poetry. By day I gave grand speeches. At night, like you, we danced to be free. I lost my city in the prime of my time. Mud, silk, and the dust of life. I was a diamond of the embassy. It doesn't matter what I meant to be. Girl, you come from the fortunate ones. Gold sky and a firstborn son. We don't have words for the way you have grown. We'll always feed you. You can always come home.
All right. So that was amazing. And I realized I was so excited to get to the flip through that I forgot to explain what we're here to talk about tonight. We're here to talk about Small Wars, which was An-My's first book that Aperture published back in 2005. And we've recently reissued a 20th anniversary edition with a new afterword by Ocean Vuong. And that's our excuse for getting this star cast together. So, but maybe tell us a little bit about what we were just listening to while we were watching the flip through, if you wouldn't mind.
No, not at all. I wasn't sure which version of the song you would be playing, and it's the yeah, it's wonderful. So Thao is a Vietnamese American artist, and
Thao Nguyen.
Nguyen, yes, and she's absolutely brilliant. I think she's an incredible musician, songwriter, performer, and this particular song, Temple, is about her channeling her mother, who worked in the American embassy at the time of the fall of Saigon. And it starts out with my city was lost during the day. And it's about her mother exhorting her also about what she will do with the freedom that she will get. But I love her work because it's full of emotion and pathos, but it's also very lucid. And she kind of flip-flops between despair and beauty and optimism. And I think in a way that's sort of my origin story as well through Vietnam.
So maybe that's a good moment to sort of say where this book begins, because the book has 3 chapters that each one focuses on a distinct body of work. The first one of yours, Vietnam, is the one that ties most directly to that song, and then there's Small Wars, and then there's 29 Palms. So maybe would you just give, for people who don't know the book and maybe don't know your work, would you narrate us across that arc a little bit?
Yes, so the first chapter was started right after I got out of grad school from Yale, so about 1993.
I'll show some pictures while you're talking.
Yes, of course. And I think the big question that was posed to me during graduate school was, who was I? And I think the obvious answer was that I needed to return to Vietnam and explore my origin. And it turned out to be right at the same time as the Clinton administration renewed relations with Vietnam. So I was able to travel back safely in 1994. And that's how the first series of work started. It was really important to me because I discovered that I was a landscape photographer. And it really kind of set me up to explore a whole range of subject matters.
That's great. And so the book, by 2005, though, that work was 20 years old, and or you had
Yes.
started that, and so you had done other bodies of work since then. So I'll jump ahead just to get to, because it's unusual for your first book to come.
And to take so long.
Right.
Yes. And so I did get some attention for that Vietnam work. It was included in New Photography,
at MoMA.
1997. Stephen introduced me to Andrew Hiller, I think, at Aperture. And he was interested in doing something, but Aperture was going through quite a lot of turmoil. And so it took
Nothing
many
like now.
years.
Nothing like now.
many
Now
years.
it's all
But-
just smooth sailing every day.
We sort of all know how important chance is,
Yeah.
right? How chance plays in a photographer's work. And I think chance played here in my favor in terms of my process. So it took quite a long time, and I was able to finish two other bodies of work before the book was published. And I think it was very serendipitous in the way the subject matters kind of inform each other, and it kind of set me up to work the way I work today, which is to photograph in the moment. It's about the contemporary, but then it's also about thinking historically and hopefully projecting in the future as well.
So, Stephen, when did you first, at what point in these three bodies of work did you first, did you see New Photography or?
I saw New Photography.
Okay.
And I think everyone's had the experience. They open a book for the first time, a novel, and they read the first page, and they immediately know, they can feel the consciousness of the author. Or a movie, in the first minute, you can see the consciousness of the filmmaker. And that's how I felt when I saw An-My's work. I could, in the New Photography show, there were two people who stood out for me then, An-My and Vic Muniz. And I could feel her attention, and I was struck by that in the kind of heart of the picture.
I mean, I remember actually seeing the work. We did portfolio reviews at MoMA back then, and I remember passing the prints around the table before New Photography, before any of that. So I agree. I think that's a really apt description. And then how did you come to work at Bard? Just give us a little, tell us a little. Did you all know each other well? Or?
No,
Okay.
the department was expanding.
What year was this?
So this was in the late 90s.
98.
Okay, so the
98.
year after New Photography.
Yeah, and so
okay.
I was able, because we were expanding, I was able to hire Vic and An-My.
So Stephen called me and he said, would you be interested in teaching? And that teaching was really not in my purview. I mean, I may have started a little bit doing summer teaching at Stanford, but really, I didn't think I was born to become a teacher.
And you thought, that's okay because?
Because I saw that she had something to teach. I mean, I have to be cognizant of my own background. I'm a high school dropout.
Right.
And I started teaching at Bard I hadn't really taught before.
And so how long had you been, sorry, forgive my
I'm
chronology.
going to interrupt you. Not only hadn't I taught before, I had never been to a class. An-My had the advantage
Of
going to classes
She
and
knew
knowing
what
how
it was
how
like
it
to be a
done.
graduate student in photography.
Right.
Even when you entered that, I would say, maybe that's actually, I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about how you came to photography, because it's not, there may be no typical path, but certainly yours is as original as, well, actually each of yours is
I
pretty
think Stephen's
original.
is-
Maybe each of you would tell us how you came to photography. Could we do a
Well,
little
you
segue?
can start.
Okay.
It's your show tonight.
I think I was 25 when I discovered photography, and this was before the phone existed, the iPhone existed. So now everyone photographs, right? I didn't own a camera. I never photographed. I had terrible grades in college. I think high school was very easy for me, and the leap to college was extremely difficult. And I wanted to go to medical school, and I did not have the grades, and so I was not accepted. And some friends suggested that I go back to school and get a master's degree, improve my grades, continue doing research as an immunologist. And I did all of those things. And during the last semester of my master's degree, I was able to take a non-science. And I thought, okay, maybe I'll take drawing. That doesn't require any material. I can do it anywhere. There were 2 drawing classes or 3. They were all filled up. But photography was opened. And so I took photography. It was taught by 2 graduate students, yeah, not Laura Volkerding or Joel Levick at Stanford. So I took the course, and it completely changed my life. I felt that, it was the answer to all the questions and uncertainties I had. I mean, the issue was, how good are you? You could love something, but if you're not good. But I pursued it. I audited more classes. I got into medical school. I deferred it. And I think ultimately Laura Volkerding told me that I should consider becoming a photographer. And I was so grateful. And that's all I needed to hear. And I never went to med school.
Well, I mean, to the question of how good are you, you asked yourself that question pretty young in life, and the answer was pretty clear pretty young. You want to say how you got into photography? It is also a great story.
When I was 5, I was interested in chemistry and had what was called, the company was A.C. Gilbert, made a chemistry kit. It was called the Chemistry Kit for Boys. Although that wasn't strictly observed, because I found out later that my wife Ginger had one when she was young. And so I liked playing, mixing chemicals. There was an instruction booklet, and I did experiments. And an uncle of mine, seeing my interest in chemistry, thought I'd be interested in photographic chemistry. And Kodak made something called the ABC darkroom outfit, which was everything you need, not an enlarger, but everything else.
Okay.
And gave me that for my 6th birthday. And I taught myself to develop and print, and immediately felt like, I mean, as far back as I can remember, I felt like I knew my calling.
And you brought, I mean, by age 14, you had brought those pictures to the Museum of Modern Art.
Yes.
And they had agreed. They agreed that you had found your calling at 14, which I find, and MoMA bought 3 pictures. Yeah, 3 pictures.
Steichen.
Edward Steichen, which is an amazing thing. So, okay, so you unusually late and you unusually early. Do you all, like, how do books sort of factor into your thinking about the medium? You know, in other words, you knew you wanted to do a book enough that you were willing to wait quite a long time for this one to emerge. How did that consciousness set in that you wanted to make it a book?
Well, I know that books are very important for a lot of photographers. I think for Stephen, Friedlander, also, Paul Graham. For me, it was just, a satellite. The most important thing was the work.
Okay.
And so that's why I continued working. And the book was just on the back burner.
All right.
But I have few books, considering how long I've been working.
Yes.
And I think it's a pleasure, and it's so edifying to kind of see it all together, and I think it helps you think about the next project. But it's pretty secondary for me.
Okay.
But maybe things will change now.
Well, so how involved, do you remember how involved you were with the design, with the choice of with Rick Woodward, or with your interview with Hilton Halls? In other words, there are all of these pieces. Was that Aperture pushing those decisions, or was that?
No, I think it was a mutual collaboration, and with the design, and I think, yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to also say that Susan Kismaric actually helped me sequence the book,
interesting.
the different chapters. Yes.
I was wondering that.
Yeah.
So Susan Kismaric was a curator at MoMA who was also the curator of the new photography that I'm using. Was certainly a champion of your work from as long as, as long as I can remember sitting around that table. And sequencing is, maybe we can, do you remember, are there any sequences that you want us to talk through? Because that is something we were conscious of when we were thinking about this book, was how we added, you said there were 5 pictures that you wanted to add in, and I remember we were sitting around the table and we were like, well, somebody needs to make a proposal for how these editions are going to go into the 20th anniversary edition. And I'm just curious how you were thinking of that.
Well, I think that we were in agreement, Susan and I, that it should be sequenced in a way a film would be sequenced or a novel would be sequenced, with some kind of start, some kind of middle, and some kind of ending.
In each chapter and in the book as a whole.
Yes,
okay.
yes. And I think something that she taught me, and I still do it, is to kind of buy a notebook and just actually start pasting the pictures in physically so that you could flip through it and get that experience. And I think eventually we did pin them up on the wall and kind of step back and look at the sequence. But it's very much how do you want to start and how do you want to end and what's in the middle. And I think it's very poetic in that there are repetitions, there are jumps, there are enjambments, very kind of lyrical and also perhaps influenced by filmmaking, a pull-back shot, an establishing shot, getting closer, pulling back, or establishing, a location or a moment and pulling it, teasing it out longer. It's all those things that come into play. And I think it's very similar to film, to music, to...
Is that how you approach making a book?
I rely a lot on editors. I like getting input from editors.
Okay. And is that, so your first book, which we had somewhere around here, but anyway, Stephen's, well, was that your first, was Uncommon Places,
Yes.
was your first book? Yeah.
Well, in those days, it was not the photo book
So this
publishing
was, sorry,
world.
we'll set the scene. This is 1982.
Right.
Since you had been making pictures since you were 14, you had also been making pictures for a long time, but
Yes.
you were still a relatively, well, actually, anyway, we don't need
You
to worry
had
about how
had
old
your show at the Met.
You had had a one-person show at the Met
And the modern.
and at the Modern by then. So, and you had no books either.
No.
Okay.
But books weren't published the way they are now. There just weren't as many books. And
How did that one come about?
it came about because I had the show at the Modern in '76,
Yeah.
and Ansel Adams saw it and liked it, and then he brought his publisher, New York Graphic, Tim Hill from New York Graphic, down to see it, and to suggest he publish it, and they agreed, but then Tim left New York Graphic and went to Aperture and became the creative director of Aperture
Lucky Aperture.
and brought the project with him. But it took from '76 to '82 to actually, Tim left Aperture and you had talked about Susan Kismarek. Susan's older sister Carol took his position, and she edited the book.
Wow. But actually, that they are an amazingly
Duo,
central
yes.
duo to the history of the medium. Somebody someday will write that book. Okay, so it was Carol who helped bring that over the finish line at Aperture.
Yeah.
And so, Stephen, that book also has had multiple iterations, and one of my favorite things that you wrote in, I guess it was maybe 2003, so around the 20th anniversary edition of that, when Aperture published a much larger, more expansive version, not just adding 5 pictures, but adding 50 pictures.
Or like
no,
80 or
it went from 49
to 135.
Okay, sorry. So, and you described in your little in your foreword to that, you said, think of it as the photographer's equivalent of a director's cut.
Right.
Yeah.
All of the things that were added in, but what was that experience like for you of revisiting it?
The first edition it was the first color book Aperture did, and they weren't used to the expense involved in a color book. So the approach was timid, and the few number of plates was not as much an aesthetic choice as an economic one.
I mean,
So
we have
they're
been a
always-
nonprofit publisher for a long time. So, yeah. Yes, okay.
So it was always clear that there was a lot of work that was excluded,
Yes,
and this gave me a chance to include more of it.
that's
So how many reprints has there been now?
So
Fifth?
it went then about 10 years ago, another 20 plates were added.
Right.
but still from the same time period. You know,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
And then Aperture published the book Selected Works,
Yes.
which is work that was not included in it.
It's a yeah. I mean, you were prolific for working with an 8x10 camera.
Well, I mean, if you go out and take pictures all day, you wind up with a lot of pictures. Even if you only do it for a couple of months, you wind up with a lot of pictures.
Well, I mean, actually, maybe do you find that? You know, in other words, or do you feel I've seen you? I've never seen you work. I've had the pleasure of seeing you work, and it does. It feels. I don't know if. How would you describe whether you feel like you go out and take pictures all day? It feels a little different for me, at least what I've witnessed from you. But
Well, that was different because
Okay.
it's almost like
Yeah.
being home. And I think for me, it's always so difficult to get to where I want to be. Either it's because of permission for traveling. So once I'm there, I really try to make the best out of these situations. So I'm always up in the morning and photographing until I drop dead, until I run out of film or
dead,
something.
right.
Or, you know, I reload in the middle. So a lot, yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
And I think I don't photograph as much now because maybe I have a better understanding of what has potential. Even though, you know, it's always surprising what works and what doesn't work, so I try not to censor myself. But I definitely, in the last 5 years, don't photograph as much. But I used to photograph from morning until I couldn't do it.
But I guess maybe what I'm trying to get at is, for this, even when we said to you, we want to do a 20th anniversary edition, and you said yes, you said there are a few pictures I want to add, but from, you know, in other words, it wasn't about changing the scale of it. And then again, you just, you know, there were 5 pictures that you felt were key that were missing, which means there's still a lot of work.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work. But I feel that the essential is right there.
Yeah.
And perhaps, you know, at some other point I'll go back and
Yeah.
look at it. But I just never have the time, you know, nor the space.
Because you're
I'm
doing your
interested in
thing.
the next thing.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's also fair enough. So I guess we should say thank you to Stephen for
Yeah.
being willing to revisit Uncommon Places with us. And I think it is they're interesting differences to how you approach something as time goes on. But we're not as many years out from this. So
I think that, you know, in terms of photographing so much and all day, it's about seeing things. You know, it's not just photographing. You know, I think Stephen and I are both curious about the world, and we're out there and we want to drive somewhere and we want to see things. And so it's a kind of continuous process that involves photography.
I'll say. So do you have a question? So in other words, this is the first time the two of you have ever been asked to talk together on camera, we'll say. Is there something about, is there something you think that either your students, you know, something you want to ask one another? I know we didn't plan on doing this, but I'm just curious. Like, is there ever anything, you know, you obviously talk a lot, whether you actually talk on camera is another thing, but is there, you know, do you have a question for On-Me either about this book, or do you have a question about Uncommon Places for Stephen, or something else that you think, you know, if your students only knew what you were saying?
Well, I have a question about the arc of a career,
Okay.
and that is, we had a conversation once, and we talked about what do you do after your first body of work.
Right.
And this is a serious question for an artist, because often, sometimes there's a period of almost inspiration, and something takes over, and you produce a body of work, and you don't even know how you do it. And then what do you do? And I think we both, in our own ways, have solved that. And I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I think I asked you that question after I finished Vietnam, and I was sort of at lost on what to do next. And I
Because
sort
you
of,
were working at Bard by then.
yeah. And I had some ideas, but it just seemed to me that, you know, I was not in some sort of clear space or defining space, and where do I go next? And I think that I realized that finishing a project doesn't mean that, you know, it's definitive and that, you know, you end there. It just means that, all right, you answered some questions, you followed your nose somewhere, and so what has not been answered? What do you want to work on? What do you want to improve on? Or what did you miss on the last project? And I think that helped me get started on the
So
next.
will you describe that process from the end of, or from when you were making the shift from Vietnam into Small Wars? What did that, because you were together then.
But there were gnawing questions, you know, for me when I was working in Vietnam. Colleagues and friends would often come to me as I was getting ready to go to Vietnam or coming back from a trip and getting going again. Oh, have you looked at the effect of Agent Orange? Have you looked at the old battle scenes in the DMZ? And have you done this or that? And I just kind of pushed it back because, you know, it was so traumatic. It was certainly not the war was not something I wanted to explore at that point. But it all came back. And so this is something I need to think about now. And how do I do that? You know, and I was lucky. I found out about, through a friend, about these young men who reenact the Vietnam War.
I'll show some pictures while you're talking.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I was told not about a specific group, so I did some research. It was the beginning of the internet, and I found these guys who reenact in North Carolina and Virginia, and got in touch with them.
And they were reenacting specifically the
specifically the Vietnam War and certain battles
Civil War soldier
and activities. Yes, and then the next question is, what do you do with that, right, with them, and what kind of pictures do you want to make? And that's how it started. And I think from there, it just seemed easier every time to get started on something else.
And in this in particular, do you want to talk a little bit about, maybe we'll pause here because, you know, about your decision? This is the first time you were in some of these pictures. I think
that was the requirement.
Right.
I had to participate, and so I had to buy all the uniform and the gear or borrow it and photograph and participate at the same time. And I realized that I was an asset for those men because I was, you know, just as authentic, if not more, than their AK-47 and their first-generation uniform. And they would actually use me as a central figure in their quote-unquote scenario. But something really interesting...
I mean, it is kind of amazing.
But something really interesting happened when you invited Jeff Wall to come and lecture at Bard. And we all went out to dinner. And I was sitting next to him, and he asked me what I was working on, so I told him about this project, and it was the beginning of it. And I told him how frustrated I was because, you know, those guys were curious about me, but they were much more interested in reenacting. And so they would never stop. I couldn't get their attention to make the pictures. I was working with a large format camera. And he basically said, well, you should pay them, you know. And I think what he means is that you should do whatever it takes to get their focus and attention. But I think I also realized that I was not so interested in completely reconstructing a world the way Jeff does. They provided me with a world that was so interesting and fascinating. And it was about somehow finding that kind of position where I could somewhat control them, but also let that world in, because it said so much about the way America was still trying to process, the history of the war of Vietnam and what happened there, and how it's perpetuated with literature and film, and these guys were just trying to process that legacy, and I was trying to process
I
as
think
well.
I heard you say in the beginning you were also working.
Yeah.
That's great.
You talked about your decision to continue using a large format camera for this. And I just saw on the screen someone in the audience asked about how we came to the decision of using, for a large part of our careers, large format cameras.
Well, the
Can I just
Vietnam,
say how happy I am that somebody else is reading the questions from the screen? I'm just going to relax. So thank you, Stephen, for doing my job better than me. That's great.
but it made sense. I had been a large format photographer, and I have to say that I do reconsider the use of the view camera every time I start a new project. And so when I started this, it was obvious that I should be using a medium format. It's a lot of action. You're running around with these guys. You can't stop them. And it just seemed counterintuitive to use the view camera. But the first few pictures that I made and I printed, I was so unhappy with the descriptive quality of a medium format camera. It seemed that the prints were not physical enough. They didn't provide the kind of experience I wanted. And so it seemed to me that the large format would be the required tool. And I just didn't see how I could make it work. And then, of course, I got inspired by the 19th century photographers. And I think it kind
Brady
of,
and
and O'Sullivan. And then it just made me realize that it's not so important to catch the unfolding moment, and that you could somehow photograph the before and the after, or actually, direct something. And I think it gave me the kind of physicality that I wanted in a print, but it really started affecting the way I photographed and what I looked for in a picture or in a moment.
I see in all the pictures in this book, the distance that you stand when you take the picture. And aside from the opening picture, the portrait, with maybe one or two exceptions, you're at a significant distance, which requires you to depend on the descriptive ability. And I think for me, a lot of the feeling of the pictures comes from that distance, and that you fill it with kind of the texture of the world. Like the fabric on this couch has a texture up close, but pull back and objects in the world have a texture, and the pictures in this book always are full of it, and that they seem to hold again a lot of the meaning of the picture.
Yeah, I think I discovered the notion of scale when I started using the view camera so much. And of course, you need to step back. You can't always be so up close and eventually photographing the military. So how do you maintain the tension, right? Because it's easy to just completely step back and then not think about the frame. And I think it's one of my favorite assignment when I teach view camera also is perhaps you're interested in something, you have an idea. My challenge to the student is that try to step back and maintain that idea and maintain the tension. And obviously at some point you would have stepped back too far and everything falls apart, but there's still a moment where you can maintain that tension. And if you can do that, the picture is more complex because your main idea is there, but then it's kind of surrounded by secondary things that kind of weave in that main idea and layers it.
And this one thing the view camera offers is exactly this,
because
that it's not simply a view through a first-person view.
Yeah.
It's almost third-person. It's creating a small world that a viewer moves their attention through.
Yeah.
But to do that, it depends on the descriptive ability of the camera.
Yeah, and I think even with the most advanced digital camera, things are as sharp, perhaps sometimes even sharper than with a large format camera. But things tend to kind of stack up on top of each other. And with a larger negative, especially with your 8x10, you can feel the air moving between things and things separate. And so I think there's a kind of physical visual experience that the larger negative provides in a print that I value a lot.
And is that how, so are you still doing this every series? You're saying?
No, I've switched to the digital camera for practical reasons, but I still use the large format.
And what about you?
Yeah.
Why do you,
I've stopped using the 8x10. I've found that when I'm working, I see so many more pictures than I can logistically take with an 810 that I sacrificed what an 810 does for the pleasure of solving more pictures in a day. And the quality of digital has gotten so good, and there's certain things that it does better. Interiors are I think, are much better.
Mm-hmm.
So, Stephen, you talk about the sort of immersion and meditative quality that you get when you use the 8x10.
Yes.
And I know that you still have maintained that.
Yes.
Can you talk about the switch from being under the dark cloth and your 8x10 screen and the digital camera?
So, a problem with digital is that I see a lot of photographers who I know are good photographers who lose a degree of intentionality when they work with digital. But it's not inherent in the process. And that if a person's experienced with an 8x10, if you've used a view camera as long as you and I have used view cameras, you can maintain that degree of consciousness and intentionality with anything, including a phone. Which is why I think the view camera class we
so
both
important.
teach is,
Yeah.
I don't care if they go continue with the view camera. But they have that taste. I asked my class this year, about 2 months into the semester, if anyone found as they were working they were in a flow state, and all the hands went up. I thought this was so interesting. Here is the most cumbersome camera, the most deliberate process.
Right.
And there's something about it that engenders a flow state when a photographer's using it. And that can be, and if you
And you think
once you
that
get
that
the
can
taste
carry over even after?
it takes a conscious effort. It doesn't happen automatically, but if you keep that state of mind, you can take a picture that with a digital camera that is as intentional and is as meditative.
I believe it. I also, Aperture was founded as a magazine of words and pictures too, and I love the Dorothea. I love and I'm perplexed by and I disagree with, but it still exists out there. Dorothea Lange's quote that every photograph can be fortified by words, and I disagree, but anyway, she said it, and she was, the founders of Aperture were really committed to this idea of what words brought to pictures. And I think one of the things that we did in this 20th anniversary, you every once in a while, Stephen sends me a piece of writing that I think, anyway, we're about to publish a new one in the magazine. And you two, have shared with me some of your, we debated a lot about whether we were going to have you write in this book. You're a beautiful writer. Maybe you tell everyone a little bit about the process of what the additional words were going to be. It was so good the way it was. We were tempted to just say, okay, it's great, but 20 years had passed, and so it felt like we should bring something new to it. And maybe you'll describe it.
I think if I had written something, it would have been about how lucky I was that I'd had the time to really work on these 3 bodies of work. And I think if we had published a book on Vietnam, the Vietnam pictures alone, I'm not sure what would have happened next.
Mm-hmm.
And I think having those 10 years to really put together those 3 projects were really, really helpful.
I mean, I can't say you're welcome because I know it shouldn't have taken that long, but you're welcome.
No, what things happen, you know,
Yeah.
and I think now, you know, I think that way within a project, so I feel very fortunate about that, and so, you know, having that perspective really clarified
And so,
that
but to
process for me.
bring Ocean Vuong
Yes.
into it, yeah.
Yes, and I'm so thrilled to be working with him. He's not even 40, and Tao Nguyen is 41, and so they're a younger generation. But I feel so close to both of them, and in particular Ocean because he wrote the afterword. He is a committed writer. He's committed to his medium as a poet, as a writer. He's not ideological. I love the way he thinks about autobiography. You know, it's part of his sentimental education, and I think it does inform his work. But it's and he writes about it in the afterword that it's that's the way he sees my work, is that it's not some sort of confessional like a first person confessional, but it is biographical in the sense that I chose what to look at, I chose what questions to ask and what to answer and where to go. I do think that I feel really comfortable, and it's not a perfect comparison, that the kind of photography I love is on par and has some sort of parallel with literature and poetry especially. You know, I think the building blocks of language is very much like the world that Stephen and I are interested in. We go out there and we work with the building blocks of the world, and we put it together within a frame, and the way one constructs a sentence, a story, or poem. And we use different methods to create tension, to create narratives perhaps sometimes in, you know, rhythms and enjambments and repetitions.
I think that's partly why photographers and writers, you know, you use the same stuff that we all use. You know, there's some definition of photography in which I'm a photographer too. The difference is what you all do with the camera is quite different from what I do, and I think writers have the same thing. You know, I also write, but I'm not a writer. Like, you know, the fact that I put words together doesn't make me Ocean Vuong, and I think it's part of what makes these media so accessible. And you know, it's almost everyone is a reader, and almost everyone is an enjoyer of photographs. And I think that sense that one, on any level, does it oneself helps foster that sense of connection with it. And
yeah, I think we're interested in describing the world, you know, in very precise ways. And what's amazing about photography is that in spite of the specificity of the description, we can actually suggest something very subjective about its meaning, what's beyond the frame and what's not really in the picture. And it's that subjective power that really interests me, yeah.
I'm right. A photograph doesn't mean what it's of. That's one of my. So someone asked, has your work been shown in Vietnam? And if so, what was the reception? Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Well, Events Ashore was going to be shown at some point, and maybe 10 years ago or less than 10 years ago. And
Events Ashore is the body of work that just post-date. It was the next body of work after these three.
Yeah, and it was actually censored the night before the show was going to open, and so it didn't happen. But
Censored by
the government, yes, yes. And we actually
I was
had
just
the
making
picture.
sure, you know.
Yeah. But recently, I met young photographers who actually had been scouring the internet to buy used copies of Small Wars as much as they could, because it's not available. And
so none of your work, even in book form, is available?
No. So I don't know how they received the book, but they actually searched for used copies of Small Wars in the past, yeah.
Well, I guess that's the good thing about reprinting it, is we'll try to make that easier for them.
Yeah, but I think that Roxana was in Vietnam recently and saw a picture from the reenactments in somebody's collection. So that's probably the first time that it was shown, and I think it's in the last few months.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So with the one body of work, though, that we didn't really talk about at all, and I feel like just to give fairness to all three. So we talked a little about Vietnam, we talked a little about Small Wars. Would you speak a little bit about 29 Palms and the shift after Small Wars, asking those questions of what you were going to do next? You know, Stephen, again, you all were teaching together, but by this point, you're further in your career and you've done this. What was that like?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, I wanted to thank Stephen for giving me a home away from home at Bard. And, you know, I think that Stephen's been supportive of all of his faculty, and he understands that we need to travel to make work. And you have always been very flexible in trying to accommodate everyone's projects and obligations. I think that I was getting, after a few years, and this is how you know that a project is coming to an end, I think I was getting a little frustrated with the reenactments and felt that I wanted something a little more serious, and I wasn't sure what that would be. So this is 2003, and we invaded Iraq. And so I think, you know, thinking about Vietnam and having not processed that, it just seemed unthinkable to me that we were going to start another war and we were going to send young American men and women there. And so it was very upsetting. And I think that I wanted to go to Iraq myself, and I was not able to do that. And so while I was doing research, found pictures of the Marines training outside of not far from LA in Joshua Tree in 29 Palms, and decided I could perhaps try to go there and photograph there. And so started this new chapter, and started, I think, this whole system that I kind of tried to figure out on how to gain access to military operations and
Yeah.
How do they view your work after they see it?
You know, they don't always ask to see it, but
So
sometimes.
really, once you've gotten permission, that's it. There's no.
Yeah. And I was perhaps afraid to show it at times, you know, thinking that they might not let me come back. But, you know, at the beginning I would bring some prints, and I think they love the work because it's large prints, it's black and white, and
But
it's
I don't see
landscape.
them necessarily objecting to it. This is
This is how you prepare
this
for
is what
war,
they do.
right?
Yeah. So
And different people may react to it differently, but I could see them thinking this is...
No, they actually liked it, and they understood that it required time and that they should let me back more than once, and I think that was the challenge. And so I spent a few years working there, and it's such an interesting place because it stood for another landscape, and at one point the Marines were training for Vietnam on that landscape as well. And so it stood for Afghanistan, but it's right outside of Los Angeles. It's a tough environment, and I think it made me think how closely the training was to the reenactments. You know, they used the same terminology, the idea of scenarios, the idea of training, the idea of role playing, and I think the notion of doing something over and over again to get it perfectly right also reminded me of filmmaking.
But they didn't ask you to play a role in it.
No. I had to wear a flak jacket and a helmet. It was live fire. Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It's completely live fire. Yes. And at the
I
beginning.
don't think I realized. Or I know I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it is live fire, except for the close quarters kind of urban training that happened at the end. But it was live fire, and I remember the first time I went to 29 Palms, I was accompanied by a public affairs officer, and she asked the person in training, okay, where should she stand? And they pointed to a spot. And every time I wanted to move, the public affairs officer would go back to the person in charge of training, ask, could she move there? Because, you know, it was just like all live firing from.
Yeah, well,
But eventually
okay.
But eventually, I got to know the person in charge of training and bypassed them.
Okay.
The public affairs. So it was a lot easier eventually. And then they knew that I knew the ropes, that I would not do anything unsafe, and
Yeah. I can't, that really does change it for me knowing that was live fire.
yeah. But those night pictures were quite extraordinary because that was live fire. So they actually had jets dropping bombs, howitzers, and machine guns and grunts in the holes. And I was there with Reka Reisinger. I don't know if you remember her. Yes. And
By the
because
way,
I knew
even
that
I
it
know.
was the last time it was happening, and we had 2 view cameras. So she was manning one, I was manning one, and we were the only 2 people outside. Everyone else was in a foxhole, in a vehicle. We were standing on this little berm, like wide open. She wore a white coat.
Okay, well, I'm glad you both are okay.
So we were okay.
That's
But it was quite something, yeah.
Well, I have to say, what is also quite something is the treat. Oh, okay. So Elizabeth, this is a good last question. Every once in a while, a viewer comes up with the last question that's better than what I was going to come up with. So we'll go with Elizabeth's concluding thoughts. Who do you hope finds this book today? Which is a great last question. I mean, I don't know, Stephen, if you have any hopes for who finds this book today, you're welcome to chime in as well.
Well, I think that people used to perhaps only be interested in the book because they had some sort of curiosity about Vietnam. But I think that it probably has a wider audience today, and that's wonderful.
Right. I hope so too. And it is part of what we're trying to do at Aperture is to make sure that we keep these books in print that have enduring interest, where maybe the original audience gets has it, but then there are other people who are interested in these other questions that the book raises. So thank you for letting us do this. Thank you both for being here. It's a joy to bring you together. I'm sure you will do many more talks with one another, but glad to be here first. Thank you to Brianna and Alex and Clark and all of the Candle team. And thank you again to FotoFocus and to all of you who tune in. I will say part of why I like to do this and part of why I convinced my family to let us do this in our living room is that it's fun to share these things, and hearing you talk about it underscores that. So,
and thank you so much for reprinting the book.
Yeah, thank you. We have a wonderful, so you're welcome. It's a joy. And thank you to the Shifts too, because we couldn't do it alone. None of the book publishing world makes sense on its own 2 feet. So yeah, thank you all, and good night.
When the book came out, there was a war going on.
Yes, we were in Iraq, yeah.
And it's a different experience for people today.
Yeah.
Or they know about it, but it's something in the past.
I mean, sometimes I have Marines coming to me